will be another one, Briar said to Sabrina. Don't worry. But she was wrong. Suddenly, the elevator came crashing down from above. People were screaming and smoke filled the air. Daphne! Uncle Jake! Sabrina cried frantically, but quickly spotted them. Daphne had fallen, but Uncle Jake helped her up. Together they studied the wreckage. The man in black had somehow cut the cables. He's diabolical, Bryce said. And not in the good way, Puck replied. There's no way up to the top, Sabrina said. They'll never get to her in time. Goldilocks is up there alone. He's going to kill her. If only I could go, Bryce said, reaching into her pocket and removing a small seed. With one of these, I could get Jacob to the top in a flash. I'm glad you are so excited about gardening, Briar, but we've got an emergency on our hands, Sabrina said. No, let me explain. When I was a kid, a witch put a spell on me that said if I ever pricked my finger on a spinning wheel, I would die. Well, luckily, I had a couple of fairy godmothers, and they fixed the spell so I would fall asleep. To keep me safe from wild animals and nutcases, they also created a magical rose bush that covered the castle so no one could get at me. When William Charming managed to cut his way through and woke me up, the first thing I did was cultivate some of the rose bush's seeds. The seeds grow like crazy, and they seem to understand how I want them to grow too. They come in handy from time to time. All you need is a handful of dirt. I have a handful of dirt, Puck said, reaching into his filthy pants pocket. When he pulled out his fist, he had a handful of crumbly soil. A fat earthworm was squiggling in the dirt. You carry dirt with you? Sabrina asked. Sure, doesn't everyone? Puck replied. What good is this going to do? We're in Fairyport Landing. The trouble is half a world away. Unless I can get out of these handcuffs, Goldilocks is going to die. Briar and Sabrina turned their gaze to Puck. Listen, I swallowed the key, he stammered. We have to let nature take its course. Disgusted, Sabrina turned to the mirror. Mirror, do we have any lock-picking stuff in the Hall of Wonders? Mirror's face appeared. Starfish, I'm increasingly concerned about your life of crime. Mirror, it's an emergency. Sabrina handed him her set of keys, and moments later he returned with a small leather case. Inside were the kind of tools Sabrina had only dreamed about when she and her sister were wards of the state. They were picks of all shapes and sizes, and she tried each one until the handcuffs snapped open. Free, she rubbed her sore wrist and turned to Briar. Maybe we should wake your grandmother, Briar said as she hesitantly handed over her magic seed. No time, Sabrina said, and turned to Puck. Hand over the dirt. Puck did as he was told, and Sabrina approached the traveler's chest. She knew if she walked down the steps now, she'd wind up outside of the Hotel Thérèse, far from where she needed to be, so she closed the lid and removed the key. I want to go to the second floor observation deck of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, she said aloud. Then she inserted the key and opened the lid. Inside, she found a completely different set of stairs. Be careful, Briar said, and tell your uncle to do the same. I will, Sabrina said as she descended. She hurried down the stairs and into the dark until she found the door. But this one did not have a doorknob. Instead, she found a button. She pushed it and it lit up, but nothing happened. She was considering turning back when the door slid open. she immediately saw her sister and uncle. Sabrina stepped out, realizing she had just gotten out of the elevators on the second level. "What are you doing here?" Uncle Jake asked. "Your girlfriend sent me for some help," Sabrina said as she hurried her family to the broken elevator shaft. There she took Puck's dirt and placed it in a heap on the floor. She then took Briar's crusty brown seed and buried it in the small pile of earth. Then she stood up and dusted herself off. Before she was finished, a tiny green sprout appeared in the dirt. It grew and grew, becoming plump and fat until it was as thick as a tree trunk and covered in roses. In no time, it was as tall as Uncle Jake and had pointy thorns sprouting out of its sides. "My girlfriend's full of secrets," Uncle Jake said as the bush rocketed into the air. He grabbed Daphne in his arms and reached out for a branch. "See you at the top, Brina." A moment later, he was yanked off the ground and sailing skyward as the rosebush grew at impossible rate. Sabrina grabbed the vine. The strength of the growing bush was incredible. She wondered if her arm might be yanked from the socket, but she held on with all her strength. Sabrina sailed higher and higher and faster until she reached the top of the Eiffel Tower when the rosebush stopped and the branch eased her gently to the platform. Sabrina stood for a moment, trying to regain her bearings and feeling this building sway in the powerful wind. She didn't like heights, especially heights moving under her feet. "She's here!" Daphne cried as she raced across the platform. Goldilocks lay on her back, motionless. Sabrina dashed to her side with Uncle Jake in tow. "Is she?" "She's alive," Uncle Jake said as he knelt to find a pulse. "It looks like she's unconscious." "But how?" Sabrina asked. Her answer came in the sound of running feet. Before anyone could react, the menacing motorcyclist had charged across the platform and tackled Uncle Jake. Caught off guard, Jake was helpless and took several brutal punches to the face and stomach. Sabrina watched him try to defend himself, but the dark rider was fast and fierce. Sabrina and Daphne rushed to help him, but they were nothing more than mosquitoes to the mysterious villain. He slapped Sabrina with a vicious backhand that sent her tumbling to the floor. When Sabrina righted herself, she realized Daphne was injured as well. "Uncle Jake!" Sabrina shouted as she watched the two men circle one another. Jake assured her that everything would be fine, but he never took his eyes off the mysterious man. "You must think you're pretty tough, hitting women and children," Uncle Jake said to the man. He replied by lunging with his knife, slashing and striking out. But Sabrina's uncle was fast and leaped away from every deadly attack. "And the outfit, hiding your face. Then again, if I was slapping people around who couldn't fight back, I'd want to hide my identity too." "You dare question my honor?" a muffled voice said from behind the helmet. "I'm the Black Knight, you fool." "I thought knights rode horses," Uncle Jake said. "I upgraded," the Black Knight said. "Who knighted you?" Uncle Jake said as he continued to dig into his pockets. "That king must have been pretty hard up for heroes." "I serve no king," the knight growled. "Only the master and his glorious vision of the future. Whenever afters take their place as rulers of the world, your kind will be in cages, serving us." "Blah, blah, blah," Uncle Jake mocked. "You Scarlet Hand losers sure do love the whole "we're going to rule the world" bit. It seems to me the only thing you've got power over is my boredom. Hold your tongue, fool, or I will cut it from your mouth." And at that moment, Sabrina's uncle took a small ring from his pocket and slipped it on. "Well, pal, if you're feeling froggy, take a leap." The Black Knight dove for Uncle Jake and the two men toppled over one another. Sabrina watched Jake lock his hand around the knight's wrist, limiting his ability to use his deadly blade. But the knight's other hand was free, and he punched her uncle several times in the jaw. They rolled over each other, kicking and punching along the way. Every time the knight seemed to get the upper hand, Uncle Jake managed to pummel him and gain control, but it never lasted long. The Black Knight was obviously stronger than Uncle Jake and a much better fighter. Sabrina could only watch in horror when the dark villain clenched his free hand around Jake's throat to choke him. Daphne scrambled over once again to lend a hand, but was tossed aside. She fell hard on the floor, but her eyes were still open. "Leave him alone," Sabrina begged. But the knight ignored her. He continued to squeeze, and Jake's face turned blue. In desperation, he raised his hand to the knight's face, and a blast of red-hot energy exploded out of the tiny ring on his pinky finger. It temporarily blinded Sabrina, but when her eyes adjusted, she saw the Black Knight was unfazed. "My master has given me a special gift, fool," he said. "Your silly magic won't work on me. Sadly, he won't see your death himself. He so wanted to witness it." Spittle came out of Uncle Jake's mouth, and his eyes started to bulge. The knight was killing him, and there was no one to stop him. No one except for Sabrina. She reached in her pocket, found the kazoo, and aimed it right at the killer. She hoped she could direct its power away from her uncle. Then she blew into it. The wind it produced swirled around the knight like it was a living creature, a bird made of nothingness, circling and howling. It lifted the Black Knight off the floor, and in his effort to stay down, he released Uncle Jake. The wind carried the knight over the edge of the tower, and he sank out of sight. Sabrina heard his fading screams and rushed to the side of the tower. There, trapped in the vines of the magical rosebush, was the knight. It had saved his life, but it wrapped around his arms and legs to prevent him from escaping. Sabrina rushed to Uncle Jake's side and helped him sit up. The man's face was raw and red, and he coughed violently, but when he got to his feet, Sabrina was sure he would be okay. Daphne raced to the fallen Goldilocks and shouted her name until she woke. "What happened?" the woman asked. "Don't worry," Sabrina said, hurrying over. "You're safe. The Black Knight is gone." "It's you," she said, her voice higher and more feminine than Sabrina had imagined. She turned to stare at the others until her eyes focused on Jake. She looked startled at first, but then smiled. "You've come to take me back," she said, as in surrender. Uncle Jake tried to talk but couldn't. All he could was shake his head. "We're not here to force you back to Fairyport Landing. We're here to ask you to come back on your own," Sabrina said. "Who are you?" Goldilocks asked. "My name is Sabrina Grimm, and this is my sister Daphne," Sabrina said, motioning to the little girl. "We're Henry Grimm's daughters," Daphne added. Goldilocks studied their faces. "I see a lot of him in you," she told Daphne, and looked at Sabrina. "So he married that girl, huh? You look just like her." Sabrina nodded. "Her name is Veronica." "I know," Goldilocks said as she got to her feet. She turned to Uncle Jake and gave him a hug. "It's good to see you, Jakey." Uncle Jake nodded and smiled and pointed at his throat. "The knight tried to choke him to death," Daphne explained. That seems to be the end of this video. And probably the last one for the night too. Anyways, bye.